My name is Harrison Caldwell, and at 72 years old, I learned the hardest lesson of my life. You can build a logistics empire that covers the entire North American continent, but you cannot build a conscience in your own son. I spent 40 years gripping a steering wheel until my knuckles turned to stone so he would never have to know the feeling of freezing in a truck cabin. But as I lay in that hospital bed, paralyzed and vulnerable, I realized I had not raised a successor. I had raised a vulture, and he was not waiting for me to die. He was just waiting for me to sign. Before I tell you how I lost everything and found myself eating in a soup kitchen, to survive, hit that subscribe button. If you believe loyalty is more important than blood, like this video, and tell me in the comments if you have ever felt betrayed by family. Now let me take you back to the moment my life effectively ended. The beep of the heart monitor was the first thing that pulled me out of the darkness. It was a steady, rhythmic, mechanical sound that seemed to be counting down the seconds of a life I no longer recognized. My eyelids felt heavy, like they were made of lead, and when I finally managed to pry them open, the harsh fluorescent lights of the intensive care unit burned my retinas. My mouth tasted like copper and old cotton. I tried to move my right arm, but it felt distant, like it belonged to someone else. A numbness hummed through my limbs, a terrifying reminder of the stroke that had put me here. I expected to see a doctor, maybe a nurse adjusting an IV drip. Or perhaps in my foolish old heart, I hoped to see my son Preston sitting in the chair by the bedside, holding his head in his hands, worried about his old man. Preston was there, but he was not worried. He was standing right over me, his face inches from mine. He was not looking at my eyes. He was looking at my hands. "Dad, you are awake," he said. His voice did not tremble with relief. It was sharp, impatient. He did not ask if I was in pain. He did not ask if I could speak. Instead, he thrust a clipboard into my field of vision. The paper on it was dense with legal jargon, but I recognized the header immediately. It was a power of attorney granting full executive control of Caldwell Logistics. "You need to sign this," Preston said, pushing a pen into my weak, trembling fingers. I tried to speak, but my tongue felt swollen. Only a dry rasp came out. I looked at him, really looked at him. He was wearing an Italian suit that cost more than my first truck. On his wrist sat a gold Rolex that gleamed under the hospital lights. His hands were soft, manicured, smooth. They were hands that had never changed a tire in the snow, never tightened a lug nut until the skin broke, never felt the vibration of an 18-wheeler hauling steel across the Rockies. My hands lying useless on the white sheets were different. They were maps of my life. Calloused, scarred, stained permanently with grease and hard work. I built this company 1 mile at a time. I missed his baseball games to secure contracts. I missed anniversary dinners to fix engine failures. I did it all so he could stand there in that suit. Preston leaned closer, and I could smell his expensive cologne masking the sterile scent of the hospital. "Listen to me, Dad," he whispered, and his tone dropped to something cold and menacing. "The board is panicking. If they find out you had a stroke, the stock is going to tank. We will lose everything. The legacy you built will be sold off for parts. Do you want that?" I blinked, tears stinging my eyes. The company. It was my third child, my masterpiece. The thought of it being carved up by competitors terrified me more than death. "Then sign the papers," Preston hissed, pressing the pen harder into my hand. "Just sign it, and I can stabilize the market. I will handle everything until you are back on your feet. It is just temporary, Dad. Just until you are better." I wanted to believe him. God help me, I wanted to believe that the boy I taught to ride a bike was still in there somewhere. My instincts, the same instincts that kept me safe on the road for 4 decades, were screaming at me. They were telling me to drop the pen. They were telling me that the look in his eyes was not concern, it was greed. But fear is a powerful liar. I was scared. Scared of my own weakness. Scared of losing the empire. Scared that if I did not sign, I would be the reason Caldwell Logistics failed. With a trembling hand, I gripped the pen. It felt like it weighed 100 pounds. Preston guided my hand to the signature line. He did not support my wrist gently. He forced it down. I scrawled something that looked vaguely like my name. It was the ugliest signature I had ever written, but it was legally binding. The moment the ink left the paper, Preston snatched the clipboard away. The speed of it made me flinch. He did not say thank you. He did not say, "Rest now, Dad." He stood up straight, adjusting his suit jacket and checking the document to ensure the signature was legible. A small, satisfied smirk played on his lips. It was a smile I had never seen before. It was the smile of a man who had just won a game I did not even know we were playing. He turned his back on me, walking toward the door. I tried to make a sound to call him back to ask him what happened next. Just then the doctor entered the room looking at his clipboard. "Ah, Mr. Caldwell is awake." Preston cut him off, stepping between me and the doctor. He lowered his voice, but in the quiet room I heard every word. It was the sentence that sealed my fate. "My father is extremely agitated," Preston said smoothly, lying with the ease of a sociopath. "The stroke has affected his mind more than we thought. He is confused and paranoid. I want him transferred to a private facility immediately. And doctor, I want strict isolation protocols. No phone calls, no visitors. He needs complete silence to recover." But the doctor started to protest. "I have the power of attorney," Preston interrupted, tapping the clipboard. "I am making the medical decisions now. Do as I say." He turned back to look at me one last time from the doorway. His eyes were dead. There was no love there, only calculation. "Rest easy, old man," he said. "I will take care of everything." Then he walked out, and the heavy door clicked shut. I lay there listening to the heart monitor beep, staring at the white ceiling, realizing with a sinking horror what I had just done. I had not just signed over my company. I had signed away my freedom. And the son I sacrificed everything for had just buried me alive. 2 weeks dragged by in that sterile hospital room. 2 weeks of silence broken only by the rhythmic beeping of machines and the occasional nurse checking my vitals with the indifference of a mechanic checking oil levels. My speech had started to return slowly, like an old engine sputtering to life on a cold morning. I could form words, though they felt heavy and thick in my mouth. My right side was still weak, but I could stand with assistance. I was ready to go home. Home. That word was the anchor holding me together. I closed my eyes and pictured it. The brick colonial house in the suburbs, the one with the wide porch, where I used to drink coffee before my dawn shifts. The house where I raised Preston. The house where my wife Martha took her last breath. I needed to be there. I needed to sit in my old leather chair, look out at the garden, and figure out how to undo the mess I had made with that signature. Finally, the day of discharge arrived. 2 paramedics came in not to walk me out, but to strap me onto a gurney. I tried to protest to tell them I could walk to the wheelchair, but they just grunted and tightened the straps. "Protocol," they said. I was loaded into the back of an ambulance, the doors slamming shut and blocking out the sunlight. I lay there watching the city pass by through the small rectangular window in the back doors. I have driven every inch of this city. For 40 years, I navigated these streets in an 18-wheeler. I know the rhythm of the traffic. I know the shortcuts. I know exactly where we are just by the slant of the shadows and the condition of the pavement. We should have turned north towards the tree-lined avenues of the residential district. Instead, the ambulance banked sharp left, heading south. My heart hammered against my ribs. We were heading towards the industrial outskirts, the part of town where the factories rust and the sidewalks are cracked by weeds and neglect. "Where are we going?" I rasped my voice, sounding desperate even to my own ears. "That is not the way home." The paramedic in the back just looked at his phone, barely glancing at me. Just following orders, pal. Address on the manifest. A cold dread settled in my stomach, heavier than the paralysis of the stroke. The ambulance slowed down, the tires crunching over gravel and broken asphalt. We stopped. The doors swung open, and the humidity of a gray afternoon hit me. This was not my home. It was a squat, ugly building made of beige concrete that was stained with years of rain and pollution. A sign hung crookedly by the gate. Shady Pines, assisted living. But there was nothing assistive about this place. It looked like a holding cell for people society wanted to forget. The windows had bars, the grass was dead, and standing there checking his watch by the entrance was Preston. He looked impeccable in his navy suit, a stark contrast to the decaying building behind him. He watched the paramedics unload me with the same expression he would use to watch a delivery truck back into a loading dock. "Preston!" I managed to shout, though it came out as a growl. "What is this?" "Take me home." He walked over, signaling the paramedics to stop for a moment. He leaned down, his face a mask of false sympathy. "Dad." "Please don't make a scene," he said, his voice smooth and practiced. "This is your new home. It is for your own good." "My new home." I repeated the words, tasting like ash. "What are you talking about?" "Take me to the house." "Take me to my house." Preston sighed, a long, exaggerated sound of patience wearing thin. "There is no house, Dad. I sold it." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The noise of the city faded, leaving only a high-pitched ringing in my ears. Sold it. My sanctuary. The place where I built my life. "You," I stammered, breathless. "You sold my house. Without telling me." "I had to, Dad," he said, straightening his cuffs. "The market was hot. And honestly, you cannot live there alone anymore. It is a liability. Too many stairs, too much maintenance. It is dangerous for a man in your condition." He said condition like it was a dirty word. Besides, he continued, a gleam of excitement entering his eyes for the first time, I needed the liquidity. The expansion project for the warehouses in the tri-state area required a massive injection of cash. The house was just sitting there eating up money. Now that capital is working for the company, it is what you would have wanted, right? Reinvesting in the business. I felt a scream building in my chest, a primal roar of rage and grief. It wasn't about the bricks or the real estate value. He didn't understand. He never understood. "The tree," I gasped, grabbing the lapel of his expensive jacket with my good hand. My grip was weak, but desperation gave it strength. The oak tree in the backyard. The one Mom and I planted on our 10th anniversary. I saw a flicker of annoyance cross his face. He peeled my fingers off his jacket as if I were a sticky child. "Dad, stop it," he hissed. "Did you protect it?" I begged, tears spilling down my cheeks, ignoring the shame of crying in front of the paramedics. "The new owners. Did you make them promise to keep the tree?" "Martha's ashes are in the soil at the roots." "Preston, tell me you saved the tree." Preston looked away, brushing off his lapel. He couldn't even look me in the eye. "The new owners wanted a swimming pool, Dad," he said flatly. "An infinity pool. The tree was in the way. It was cut down last week." I felt something snap inside me. It was the last tether connecting me to my past life. He hadn't just sold a house. He had paved over his mother's memory for a warehouse expansion. He had erased the last physical evidence that my wife and I had existed there. "You monster," I whispered, the fight draining out of me, replaced by a cold, hollow void. Preston gestured to the paramedics. "Take him inside." "Room 104. "No," I screamed as the gurney began to move. "No, Preston, you cannot leave me here. This is a prison. I will visit when I can." "Dad?" he called out, already walking toward his sports car. "But business is crazy right now. You know how it is." The paramedics wheeled me through the automatic glass doors. The smell hit me instantly. It was the smell of pine cleaner trying and failing to mask the scent of urine-boiled cabbage and despair. The hallway was dim, lined with elderly people sitting in wheelchairs staring at blank walls. They looked like ghosts, and now I was one of them. We reached room 104. It was a small square box with a narrow bed and a window that looked out onto a brick wall. They transferred me from the gurney to the bed. My body felt heavy, useless. The head nurse, a woman with tired eyes and a clipboard, walked in. She didn't smile. She didn't introduce herself. She just checked my wristband. "Mr. Caldwell," she said, "your son left instructions. No phone access. He says it agitates you. And we have a strict policy here. Lights out at 8. Breakfast at 6. Do not cause trouble, and we will get along fine." She walked out, and the heavy door clicked shut behind her. I heard the distinct sound of a lock engaging. I sat on the edge of the hard mattress, listening to the muffled sounds of the facility. I was 72 years old. I was the founder of Caldwell Logistics. I had negotiated deals with senators and union bosses, and now I was a prisoner in a room that smelled like death, stripping of my home, my fortune, and even the tree that held my wife's spirit. Preston thought this was the end. He thought he had parked me here like a broken-down truck in a scrapyard, waiting for me to rust away into silence. I clenched my left hand, the one that still worked. I felt the calluses on my palm, the hardened skin of a man who had worked every day of his life. Preston had made a mistake. He judged me by my current weakness. He forgot where I came from. He forgot that you don't fight a man who has nothing left to lose. I looked at the window. It had bars, yes, but I noticed the screws on the frame were rusted. The door was locked. My house was gone. But as darkness fell over Shady Pines, I didn't sleep. I sat there in the dark, and for the first time in 2 weeks, I didn't cry. I began to plan, because Preston had taken my past, but he was not going to take my future. Shady Pines was not a facility for recovery. It was a warehouse for the unwanted. It took me 3 days to realize the rhythm of the place. The silence in the hallways was not peaceful. It was the heavy quiet of people who had given up. I watched my neighbors, men and women who had once been teachers, engineers, and mothers, now reduced to silent ghosts staring at flickering televisions. They were not being treated, they were being managed. And the management tool of choice was a small blue pill distributed every night at 8 o'clock sharp. They called it a sleep aid, but I knew better. It was a chemical shackle designed to keep us docile and quiet, so the staff could ignore us until morning. The night nurse was a man named Earl. He was a large, imposing figure who smelled of stale tobacco and indifference. Every night, he would push his cart down the hall, stopping at each door to dispense the blue oblivion. "Time for your vitamin, Mr. Caldwell," he would say, his voice lacking any warmth. I took the pill from his paper cup. My hand trembled not from the stroke, but from a simmering rage that was slowly boiling over. I placed the pill on my tongue. Earl watched me, expectation in his eyes. He wouldn't leave until he saw me swallow. So I performed the only trick I had left. I mimicked the motion of swallowing, gulping down a mouthful of lukewarm water while sliding the bitter pill under my tongue. "Good night, old-timer," Earl grunted, turning his cart around. The moment the door clicked shut, I spit the pill into my hand. It was dissolving slightly, leaving a chemically sour taste in my mouth. I hid it under the mattress, joining the 2 others I had collected. I lay in the dark, waiting. My body was still weak, the left side lagging behind the right, but my mind was sharpening. The fog of the stroke was lifting, replaced by a singular, crystal-clear purpose. I had to get out. The storm hit Chicago around midnight. I could hear it howling against the brick walls, rattling the barred window of my room. It was a beast of a storm, the kind that buried cars and froze power lines. To anyone else, it was a reason to stay inside under warm blankets. To me, it was cover. I waited until 2 in the morning. That was when Earl usually settled into the break room at the end of the hall. I could hear the faint sound of an action movie playing on the TV, his only companion for the graveyard shift. I swung my legs over the edge of the bed. The floor was ice cold. I was wearing nothing but the thin cotton pajamas the facility provided. They offered no protection against the draft, let alone a blizzard, but I had no choice. I crept to the door. It was locked from the outside, of course, but I had been watching. During the day, the cleaning staff often left the supply closet at the end of the hall unlocked. And inside that closet was a window that faced the back alley, a window without bars, because it was too small for a normal person to squeeze through. But I was not a normal person anymore. I was a desperate man who had lost 20 pounds in the hospital. I picked the lock of my room door with a piece of wire I had worked loose from the spiral binding of an old magazine. It took me 10 agonizing minutes, my hands shaking, my breath held tight in my chest. Finally, a soft click echoed in the silence. I pushed the door open inch by inch. The hallway was empty, lit only by the red glow of the exit signs. I moved like a shadow, hugging the wall, dragging my weak left leg. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like a gunshot. I reached the break room. Through the crack in the door, I saw Earl slumped in a chair, snoring softly, the TV casting flickering blue light over his face. On the hook by the door hung a heavy wool coat. It was stained and smelled of oil, but to me it looked like armor. I reached in, holding my breath, and snatched it. Earl shifted in his sleep, snorting loudly. I froze, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. He didn't wake. I slipped the coat on. It was 3 sizes too big, swallowing my frail frame, but the warmth was instant. I made it to the supply closet. Inside, amidst the smell of bleach and mop water, I found the window. It was high up. I dragged a bucket over, climbing onto it with trembling legs. I pushed the window. It was stuck, frozen shut by years of neglect and the ice outside. I gritted my teeth, channeling every ounce of anger I had for Preston. I thought of his smirk, his expensive suit, his lie about the tree. With a guttural grunt, I shoved. The ice cracked and the window flew open. The wind hit me like a physical blow. Snow swirled into the closet, biting my skin with 1,000 icy teeth. I didn't hesitate. I pulled myself up and tumbled out into the darkness, falling 4 feet into a snowdrift. The cold was instantaneous and brutal. It seized my lungs, making me gasp. I was outside. I was free. But I was standing in a foot of snow in the middle of a blizzard, wearing pajamas and a stolen coat. I started to walk. The wind screamed in my ears, trying to push me back, trying to knock me down. My left leg dragged through the heavy snow, a dead weight that threatened to anchor me to the spot. Every step was a battle. I fell. The snow rushed into my sleeves, stinging my arms. I lay there for a moment, the cold seeping into my bones, whispering that it would be easier to just close my eyes. But then I saw Preston's face in the darkness. I saw him signing the papers, selling my home, erasing my life. "No," I hissed into the wind. "Not like this. You don't get to win this easily." I forced myself up, screaming internally at my muscles to obey. I put one foot in front of the other. The alley opened up onto a deserted street. The streetlights were halos in the swirling white void. There were no cars, no people, just me and the storm. I needed shelter. I needed to get away from shady pines before Earl woke up and realized his prisoner was gone. I walked for what felt like hours, though it might have only been 20 minutes. My fingers were numb, my face devoid of sensation. Finally, I saw a structure ahead. A bus stop shelter. It was just a plexiglass box with a bench, but it offered a reprieve from the biting wind. I stumbled inside, collapsing onto the freezing metal bench. I huddled inside the oversized coat, trying to conserve whatever heat I had left. My hands brushed against something in the pocket of the stolen coat. I pulled it out. A crumpled $20 bill and a silver Zippo lighter. I flicked the lighter. The flame sparked to life, dancing in the drafty shelter. It was a tiny, fragile thing, but it was fire. It was light. I stared at the flame, mesmerizing by its resilience. I was Harrison Caldwell. I had built a logistics empire. I had commanded fleets of trucks. I had millions in the bank. And now I was sitting at a bus stop in the middle of the night with $20 to my name and a coat that didn't belong to me. I was homeless. I was a fugitive from a nursing home. I was at the absolute bottom. But as I snapped the lighter shut, extinguishing the flame, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. I felt alive. The fear was gone, burned away by the cold and the rage. Preston had stripped me of my assets, my home, and my dignity. He thought he had destroyed me. He was wrong. He had just set me free. The man who signed those papers in the hospital was dead. The man sitting at this bus stop was someone else entirely, and he had a score to settle. I looked out into the storm, watching the snow bury the world I used to know, and I waited for the first bus out of hell. 3 days. That is how long it takes for a man to lose the veneer of civilization. 3 days of sleeping under bridges and shivering in the damp cold of the Chicago underbelly. 3 days of counting every penny of the $20 I had in my pocket, terrified to spend even a dime because I did not know when I would see money again. Hunger was no longer a sensation. It was a living thing inside me, a clawed beast that scraped against my ribs and made my hands shake uncontrollably. I stood in line outside a building called The Haven. The name was painted in peeling blue letters above a door that looked like it had been kicked in more than once. The line wrapped around the block, a snake of broken humanity. There were men talking to themselves, women clutching plastic bags filled with everything they owned, and veterans with thousand-yard stares. And then there was me, Harrison Caldwell, the man who used to wear Italian silk ties and eat steaks that cost more than the rent for these people. Now I was just another old man in a dirty coat waiting for a handout. The humiliation was a physical weight heavier than the fatigue in my legs. I kept my head down, pulling the collar of the stolen coat up to hide my face. I was terrified that someone might recognize me, though that was foolish. The people I used to know did not come to places like this. They did not even look at places like this when they drove by in their heated luxury cars. And then I heard it. The deep, guttural rumble of a diesel engine downshifting. It was a sound I knew better than my own heartbeat. I looked up instinctively. Rolling down the adjacent avenue was a massive 18-wheeler. The chrome grille gleamed in the gray afternoon light. The cab was a pristine, polished red. And there, emblazoned on the side of the trailer in bold white letters, was the logo I had sketched on a napkin 40 years ago. Caldwell Logistics. Moving the future. The irony hit me so hard I almost fell over. That was my truck, my fleet, my name. I bought that rig. I signed the check for the fuel in its tank. I negotiated the insurance policy that covered it. That truck was carrying thousands of dollars worth of cargo, generating profit that was flowing directly into the accounts I could no longer access. It roared past me, kicking up a spray of dirty slush that splattered against my legs. The driver honked at a slow-moving car, a sound of arrogance and power. I stood there freezing and starving while my own legacy drove by and left me in the mud. My son was probably sitting in my office right now, looking at a spreadsheet counting the money that truck was making. He was probably drinking the scotch I had been saving for my retirement. The rage that flared up in my chest was hot enough to melt the snow around my boots. "Hey, old man, keep moving." The voice was raspy and close to my ear. I stumbled forward, realizing the line had moved. The man behind me was twitching, his skin pale and scabby. He smelled of chemicals and unwashed sweat. He was eyeing me up and down, his gaze lingering on my feet. I was wearing a pair of sturdy work boots I had found at a Goodwill bin yesterday. They were scuffed and 2 sizes too big, but they were solid. better than the hospital slippers I had escaped in. "Nice boots," the man whispered, stepping closer. "Too nice for a corpse like you." I ignored him, keeping my eyes on the door of the soup kitchen. We were getting closer. I could smell the food now. It wasn't a good smell, boiled cabbage and overcooked beans, but to my starving body it smelled like a 5-star restaurant. I said, "Those are nice boots," the junkie hissed. I felt a hand grab my shoulder, spinning me around. He was younger than me, maybe in his 30s, but drugs had hollowed him out. He was desperate, and desperation makes people dangerous. But he made a mistake. He looked at my gray hair and my stooped posture, and he saw a victim. He saw a frail senior citizen who would cower and beg. He didn't see the man who had changed tires in ice storms. He didn't see the man who had once fought off 2 hijackers in a truck stop in Memphis with nothing but a tire iron and a bad attitude. He reached down, grabbing the lapel of my coat with one hand, his other hand reaching for my collar to intimidate me. "Give me the boots, Pops, or I will crack your head open right here." My reaction wasn't a conscious thought. It was muscle memory. It was 40 years of hard labor and zero tolerance for bullies. My left hand, the one that was supposed to be weak from the stroke, shot up and clamped onto his wrist. The adrenaline surged through me, overriding the damage in my nerves. I didn't just hold him, I twisted. I stepped in close, using my body weight, and torqued his wrist backward against the joint. It is a simple move one every trucker knows. It forces the body to follow the hand or risk the bone snapping. The junkie let out a yelp of surprise and pain, his knees buckling. I didn't let go. I leaned into his ear, my voice low and cold, sounding like gravel grinding in a mixer. "I have driven trucks over things bigger than you," I growled. "Touch me again, and I will break this wrist like a dry twig. Do you understand?" He nodded frantically, his eyes wide with shock. I shoved him backward. He stumbled, clutching his wrist, and scrambled away, disappearing into the alley without looking back. I straightened my coat, my chest heaving. The adrenaline was fading, leaving me trembling again, but this time it wasn't from cold. It was from the realization that I was still dangerous. I was not dead yet. I looked around to see if anyone else wanted to try their luck. The other people in line looked away, keeping their heads down. They didn't want trouble. But one pair of eyes held mine. Sitting on a crate near the entrance was a young man. He had dark hair and a thick beard, wearing a hoodie that had seen better days. He was eating a piece of bread, slowly watching the scene unfold. He didn't look like the addicts or the mentally ill. His eyes were sharp, intelligent, and guarded. He looked like a soldier without a war. He saw what I did. He saw the wrist lock. He saw the flash of violence that didn't match the appearance of a helpless old man. He didn't smile and he didn't applaud. He just gave me a nearly imperceptible nod. Acknowledgement. Game recognizing game. I turned back to the door as it finally opened. I shuffled inside, the warmth of the room hitting me like a physical blow. I grabbed a plastic tray, my hands still shaking slightly. The volunteer behind the counter, a cheerful woman who looked too clean for this place, ladled a scoop of gray stew into a bowl and dropped a piece of hard bread onto the tray. "God bless you," she said automatically. I didn't answer. I couldn't. I took the tray and found a spot at a long communal table. I sat down, staring at the bowl. It was watery soup with floating chunks of potato and mystery meat. It was the kind of slop I wouldn't have fed to my dogs a month ago. But as I lifted the plastic spoon to my mouth, the steam hit my face. I took the first sip. It was hot. It was salty. It was the best thing I had ever tasted. And that was when I broke. I put the spoon down. I tried to hold it back, but the dam burst. A single tear rolled down my cheek, hot and stinging. Then another. They fell into the soup, disappearing into the gray broth. I wasn't crying because I was sad. I wasn't crying because I was grateful. I was crying because I was angry. I looked at the reflection of the fluorescent lights in the oily surface of the soup. I saw my distorted face. I saw the face of a man who had been erased. Preston thought I was gone. He thought I was rotting in shady pines drugged into oblivion. He was probably laughing right now, thinking he had won. He thought he could take my house, my company, and my dignity, and I would just fade away. I gripped the spoon until the plastic bent in my hand. I wiped the tears from my face with the back of my rough hand. I ate the soup. I ate every drop. I ate the stale bread. I ate with a ferocity that surprised me. I needed the fuel. I needed the strength. Because I wasn't just eating to survive anymore. I was eating to build the energy I needed to destroy him. I looked up across the room and saw the young man Luis watching me again. He was studying me, perhaps wondering what a man like me was doing in a place like this. Let him watch. Let them all watch. I finished the bowl and set the spoon down with a clatter. The humiliation was still there, burning in my gut, but it had changed. It was no longer a weight that crushed me. It was a fire that would forge me. I am Harrison Caldwell, I whispered to the empty air, and I am coming for my truck. I am coming for my company. And Preston. God help you, I am coming for you. The plastic spoon was halfway to my mouth when the shouting started. It shattered the fragile peace of the dining hall, cutting through the low murmur of voices and the clatter of trays. I lowered my hand, my heart skipping a beat in my chest. Instinctively, I wanted to shrink back to make myself invisible. That is the first rule of survival on the streets. Do not get involved. Do not draw attention. But then I saw who was being yelled at. It was Luis. The young man who had watched me with silent respect when I defended myself against the junkie. He was standing near the serving line, his posture rigid, his hands balling into fists at his sides. Standing over him was the floor manager, a man with a red face and a badge that read Kevin. Kevin was the kind of petty tyrant I had fired by the dozens in my career. The kind of man who gets a tiny sliver of power and uses it to crush anyone smaller than him. You heard me get out, Kevin barked, pointing a thick finger toward the door. We have new rules as of this morning. No government ID, no meal. We are cracking down on vagrants who abuse the system. Luis did not move. His voice was low, vibrating with suppressed anger. I have been coming here for 2 weeks. You know who I am. My ID was stolen when my backpack got slashed. I just need to eat. Not my problem. Kevin sneered, crossing his arms over his chest. No papers, no food. That is the policy. Now beat it before I call the cops and have you dragged out for trespassing. The room went silent. Dozens of men and women looked down at their plates, terrified that if they looked up, they would be next. Luis stood his ground for a second longer, his jaw working, and then his shoulders slumped. The fight drained out of him. He turned to leave, the humiliation radiating off him in waves. Something inside me snapped. It was not the anger of a homeless man. It was the indignation of a man who had spent 40 years reading contracts, negotiating with unions, and understanding the fine print of the law. I knew how organizations like this worked. I knew where their money came from. And I knew a bully when I saw one. I stood up. My knees popped and my stolen coat hung loosely on my frame, but when I spoke, my voice did not waver. It was the voice that had commanded boardrooms. Actually, that is not entirely accurate, is it, Kevin? The manager spun around, blinking in surprise. He looked at me, seeing only a scruffy old man in dirty clothes. Who asked you, Pops? He spat. Sit down and shut up. I walked toward them. I did not shuffle. I walked with a purpose. I stopped 3 feet from him, meeting his eyes with a cold, level stare. This facility operates under a 501c3 tax-exempt status. I said my words precise and sharp, which means you receive federal block grants for emergency food assistance. Under the Emergency Food Assistance Act of 1983, specifically, Title II eligibility cannot be denied based on a lack of fixed address or documentation if the recipient self-declares need. Furthermore, requiring identification as a prerequisite for food aid in a federally subsidized program constitutes a barrier to access, which violates the non-discrimination clauses of your funding agreement. Kevin's mouth opened, but no sound came out. He looked at me as if I had suddenly started speaking Latin. The room was deathly quiet. I took a step closer, lowering my voice so only he and Luis could hear. If you kick this young man out, I will walk down to the public library, use their free computer, and file a formal complaint with the USDA and the State Attorney General. I will cite the specific statutes you are violating. An audit will follow. And when they look at your books, Kevin, do you think they will like what they find? Or will they find that you are creating arbitrary rules to power trip over hungry people? The color drained from Kevin's face. He looked from me to Luis, then back to the serving line. He swallowed hard. He did not know who I was, but he knew he was outmatched. Whatever he muttered, avoiding my eyes. I do not have time for this nonsense. Feed him. Just get him out of my face. Kevin turned and stormed off toward his office, slamming the door. The tension in the room broke. People started eating again, but their whispers were louder now. I turned to Luis. He was staring at me, his dark eyes wide with a mixture of shock and curiosity. Go get your food, son, I said softly, before he changes his mind. Luis nodded slowly. He went through the line, got his tray, and then without asking, he walked over to my table. He sat down opposite me. He did not eat immediately. He just looked at me, studying my face, trying to reconcile the homeless man he saw with the legal expert he had just heard. He picked up the piece of bread from his tray. It was a dry, hard roll, the kind that scratches your throat on the way down. He broke it in half. He slid the larger half across the dirty table toward me. For you, he said. His voice was raspy, unused to kindness. I shook my head. You need it more than I do. You are young. Take it, Luis insisted, pushing it closer. Nobody has ever stood up for me like that. Not without wanting something in return. Who are you, old man? You are not just some guy from the street. You talk like a lawyer or a judge. I picked up the bread. It felt warm in my hand. I am neither, I said, tearing off a small piece. I used to manage people. A lot of people. I know that rules are often just walls built by small men to keep others out. Luis snorted a bitter sound. You got that right. Small men with big desks. They run the world. And they ruin the rest of us. We ate in silence for a few minutes. There was a camaraderie forming between us, the bond of two soldiers in the same trench. I finished my soup and looked at him. What is your story, Luis? I asked. You do not look like an addict. You are sharp. You have good reflexes. Why are you here? Luis stopped chewing. He looked down at his hands. They were strong hands, scarred and calloused, with grease permanently etched into the cuticles. I recognized those hands. They were the hands of a mechanic. A driver. I was a driver, Luis said quietly, his voice thick with nostalgia and pain. The best in the tri-state area. I could back a 53-foot trailer into a loading dock with 2 inches of clearance on either side, blindfolded. I loved it. The road, the freedom, the sound of the turbo spooling up on a long climb. It was the only place I ever felt peaceful. I leaned forward, my interest piqued. I knew that feeling. I knew the seduction of the highway. What happened? I asked. Luis clenched his jaw. I was working for a big outfit, huge logistics company. They started putting pressure on us. Tight deadlines, impossible schedules. They wanted us to run 2 logbooks, one for the DOT inspectors and one for the payroll. They wanted me to drive 18 hours straight without sleep. I nodded. I knew the practice. I had spent my career fighting against it in my own company, ensuring my drivers were rested even if it cost me profit. But I knew others were not so scrupulous. I refused, Luis continued, his eyes hardening. I told my dispatcher to go to hell. I told him I wasn't going to kill a family on the highway just so the CEO could buy another yacht. I threatened to report them to the safety board. And I asked, dreading the answer. And so they taught me a lesson, Luis said, his voice dropping to a whisper. 2 days later, the cops pulled me over for a routine inspection. They found a bag of meth taped under the driver's seat. I had never touched the stuff in my life, but it didn't matter. It was my truck, my responsibility. The company washed their hands of me, said I was a rogue element. I did 18 months in state prison. I lost my license. I lost my apartment. My fiancée left me because she didn't want to be married to a felon. He looked up at me, his eyes burning with a cold, white-hot hatred. They took my life, old man. They didn't just fire me. They destroyed me to make sure I could never speak up again. I felt a chill run down my spine that had nothing to do with the drafty room. It was the familiarity of the story. It was the ruthless efficiency of corporate power. Do you have a picture, I asked, not sure why I wanted to know. Of your truck? Luis smiled for the first time. It was a sad, broken smile. He reached into the inner pocket of his hoodie close to his heart. He pulled out a worn, creased photograph. He handled it like it was a holy relic. She was beautiful, he whispered, sliding the photo across the table to me. 2019. Peterbilt. 500 horsepower. I kept her polished every day. I looked down at the photo. The world stopped. The noise of the soup kitchen faded into a dull roar. My breath caught in my throat, choking me. The truck in the photo was red, a deep, rich crimson that I had personally selected from the paint swatches 40 years ago. It was the signature color of my fleet. And there on the side of the sleeper cab, in bold white letters, was the logo. Caldwell Logistics. I stared at the image. I stared at the unit number on the bumper. Unit 405. I remembered approving the purchase of that batch of trucks. I remembered the safety meetings where I told my managers that safety was our priority. But I also remembered the last few years. The years when I started stepping back, letting Preston take on more responsibility. The years when profits soared and I didn't ask enough questions about how those numbers were achieved. Luis was not just a victim of the system. He was a victim of my system. The young man sitting across from me sharing his bread had been destroyed by the company that bore my name. The company I built with my own hands had been turned into a weapon against honest men like him. And the man who gave the order to frame him, the man who demanded those impossible schedules, was my son. Preston. I felt a wave of nausea. I wanted to vomit. I looked up at Luis. He was looking at the photo with love and longing, unaware that he was sitting across from the man who founded the monster that ate his life. Nice rig, I managed to say, my voice trembling. Yeah, Luis sighed, taking the photo back and tucking it away. She was the best. One day I am going to find the people who did this to me. The dispatcher, the manager, the guy at the top, and I am going to make them pay. I looked at him. I looked at the fire in his eyes, and for the first time I felt the full weight of my guilt. I wasn't just a father betrayed by a son. I was a king who had let his kingdom rot, and now I was seeing the bodies buried in the foundation. I will help you, I said. The words came out before I could stop them. Luis laughed, a dry, humorless sound. You. Help me. No offense, old man, but you can barely walk. What are you going to do against $1 billion company? I leaned in. My eyes locked onto his. I didn't see a homeless kid anymore. I saw an ally. I saw a weapon. I know how they work, Luis, I said, my voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. I know their blind spots. I know where they hide the paperwork. I know the laws they are breaking. You have the muscle. You have the drive. But I have the map. Luis stopped laughing. He studied me again, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. He saw that I was not joking. Why, he asked. Why would you help me? Because I said, carefully choosing my words, hiding the truth for now. Because I hate bullies. And because I think it is time the big men with the big desks learned that they cannot crush people like us without a fight. Luis held my gaze for a long moment. Then slowly, he nodded. He reached out and offered his hand. I am Luis, he said. I hesitated. I couldn't tell him yet. If I told him I was Harrison Caldwell, he would kill me right here. I had to earn his trust. I had to fix this. I gripped his hand. It was rough and strong. Call me Harry, I lied. Just Harry. We shook hands over the crumbs of the bread. It was a pact made in the depths of hell, a driver who lost his truck and a CEO who lost his soul. Together we were going to burn Caldwell Logistics to the ground, or we were going to die trying. We walked out of the soup kitchen, and the cold wind of Chicago immediately slapped us in the face. It was a brutal reminder that the warmth inside was temporary, and we were back in the jungle. I motioned for Luis to follow me to a secluded alcove behind an abandoned appliance store, where the wind was blocked by a dumpster. It was not a boardroom, but it was the only office I had left. Luis leaned against the brick wall, crossing his arms over his chest. He looked at me with suspicion, his eyes narrowing under the hood of his sweatshirt. You talk a big game for a guy sleeping on the street, Harry, he said. You said you know how they work. You said you know where they hide the paperwork. Who were you really? Because you were not just a manager. Managers do not know the legal codes for tax evasion off the top of their heads. I took a deep breath. The icy air filled my lungs, helping to clear the fog that had clouded my mind for weeks. I had to be careful. If I told him I was Harrison Caldwell, the man whose name was painted on the door of the truck that ruined his life, he would likely beat me unconscious before I could finish the sentence. The wound was too fresh and his anger was too righteous. I was a senior vice president of operations. I lied smoothly, mixing truth with fiction. I was the one who built their logistics network. I hired the drivers. I wrote the safety protocols. And 3 weeks ago, they fired me because I started asking questions about where the money was coming from. They took my pension. They blacklisted me. And just like you, I lost everything because I refused to look the other way. Luis stared at me for a long moment, chewing on the inside of his cheek. He was weighing my words, looking for a crack in the story. Finally, he let out a sharp, bitter laugh. So you are one of them, he said, spitting on the ground. You are a suit. You are the guy who sat in the air conditioning while I was sweating in a cab for 14 hours a day. You are the guy who cut my bonuses to pad your bottom line. Why should I trust you? I should walk away right now and leave you to freeze. He turned to leave his boots crunching on the dirty snow. I knew I had one shot to stop him. I had to prove that I was useful. I know about the Code 74 overrides. I said, my voice cutting through the wind. I know that the dispatch software has a backdoor that allows management to edit driving logs after the fact. And I know that if you were framed for possession, it was because someone in the central office manually unlocked your cab remotely using the admin key. Luis stopped. His shoulders stiffened. He turned back slowly, his face a mixture of shock and anger. How do you know about the admin key? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. They told us that was a myth. They told us the trucks were secure. I built the system, Luis, I said, stepping closer. I know where the bodies are buried because I dug the graves, but I did not know they were putting real bodies in them. I thought we were just cutting corners on fuel costs. I did not know they were destroying lives. I want to take them down, Luis. I want to see the stock price hit zero. You want revenge for your truck. I want justice for my life work. We are the only two people in this city who have the pieces of the puzzle. Alone, we are just two bums. Together, we are a nightmare. Luis looked at me, his eyes searching mine. He saw the hatred burning in me. It mirrored his own. Slowly, he nodded. Okay, Harry, he said. You want to know why I went to prison. You want to know what I saw. He looked around to make sure we were alone, then he lowered his voice. It started about 6 months ago. Preston Caldwell, the big boss, took over the day-to-day operations. Suddenly, the schedules changed. I was getting calls on a burner phone, not the company dispatch radio. They offered me triple my rate for what they called ghost routes. Ghost routes, I repeated the term, chilling my blood. I had never heard of it. Night runs, Luis explained. No manifests, no logs. The GPS in the truck was disabled. I had to drive dark back roads, avoiding way stations and toll booths. The destination was always the same, a private salvage yard down by the docks in Gary, Indiana. And the cargo, I asked, dreading the answer. Luis shuddered, pulling his coat tighter around himself. On the paperwork, it was listed as charitable donations, food, clothing, medical supplies. We were supposedly shipping surplus goods to NGOs for export to developing countries in Africa and Southeast Asia. It looked good on paper. Great tax write-offs for the company. Everyone loves a hero, right? He paused, kicking at a frozen lump of ice. But one night about 3 months ago, I hit a deer on a back road in Ohio. I had to stop to check the damage to the radiator. While I was down there, I noticed a fluid leaking from the trailer. It was not food. It smelled like acid. It was burning a hole in the asphalt. I felt a sickness rising in my throat. I knew what was coming. I cut the seal, Luis said, his voice trembling with the memory. I know I was not supposed to, but I had to know. I opened the back doors. The crates were marked rice and canned goods, but the one leaking was smashed at the bottom. I pried it open. He looked me dead in the eye. It was batteries, Harry. Thousands of stripped lithium-ion batteries, broken monitors, circuit boards dripping with mercury and lead. It was a waste, toxic garbage that is illegal to dump in the U.S. They were shipping it overseas, labeled as food, so they could dump it in third-world countries without paying the disposal fees. They were poisoning entire villages to save a few dollars a ton. I closed my eyes, leaning back against the brick wall. The shame was a physical weight crushing my chest. My company. The company I built on principles of reliability and trust. Preston had turned it into a cancer. He was not just greedy, he was evil. He was smuggling toxic waste under the guise of charity, using my trucks and my reputation to poison the earth. I leaned my head back, looking up at the gray sky. He is a monster, I whispered. Yeah, Luis said, but that is not even the worst part. I opened my eyes. What could be worse than that? The run that got me arrested, Luis said, his voice dropping even lower. The run where they planted the drugs. That was different. I was picking up from the same warehouse, but the crates were not leaking. And when I loaded them, they felt wrong. Wrong how I asked. Too light, Luis said. A crate of batteries weighs a ton. These crates were the same size, but they were light, maybe 100 pounds each, and they were balanced perfectly. I did not open them because I was scared. But when I was driving, I could feel the way the trailer moved. It was not dead weight. It was packed tight, cushioned. He stepped closer to me, his eyes intense. Batteries do not need foam padding, Harry, and old computer screens do not need shock sensors on the crates. I saw the stickers when I was loading. Fragile. Handle with care. You do not put that on garbage. I stared at him, my mind racing. Light crates, foam padding, shock sensors, ghost routes. Preston was not just dumping waste anymore. He was moving something else, something valuable, something dangerous enough to frame a driver and send him to prison just for asking questions. "I think I know what it is," I said slowly, the pieces starting to click together in my CEO brain. "And if I am right, e-waste is just the cover story. The real money is in what comes back, or what goes out hidden inside the junk." Luis nodded. Whatever it was, it scared the dispatcher. When I asked about the weight, he turned pale. He told me to shut up and drive. 2 hours later, the cops were behind me. I pushed myself off the wall. The cold was gone, replaced by a burning resolve. "We need to find out what was in that truck, Luis. We need proof, not just of the waste, but of the other cargo. If we can prove he is smuggling, we can put him away for life." "How?" Luis asked. "I cannot get near the yard. They have my face on a poster in the guard shack." "I do not," I said. "To them, I am just a dead man walking, and dead men can go places the living cannot." I looked at Luis. "Take me to the yard," I said. "Tonight. Show me where you loaded that truck." Luis hesitated, then a slow grin spread across his face. It was the grin of a wolf who just found the scent of blood. "You are crazy, old man," he said. I buttoned my stolen coat. "No, Luis," I said. "I am just a father who needs to discipline his son. Let us go to work." The journey to Yard 4 was a march through the graveyard of my own history. We moved through the industrial district under the cover of a moonless sky, sticking to the shadows that stretched long and deep between the warehouses. Every step was a battle. My left leg, still heavy and unresponsive from the stroke, dragged through the snow with a scraping sound that seemed deafening in the silence. Luis walked ahead of me, his movements fluid and alert, checking corners and watching for patrols. He would stop every few minutes, looking back to make sure I had not collapsed. The look in his eyes was not pity, but it was close. It was the look you give a wounded animal that is slowing down the pack. Yard 4 was the crown jewel of the Caldwell logistics network. I remembered the day I cut the ribbon on this facility 15 years ago. It was designed to be impenetrable. A fortress of steel and concrete surrounded by 12-foot fences topped with razor wire that glistened menacingly under the floodlights. I had hired the best security consultants in the business to design the perimeter. I wanted to ensure that not a single bolt or screw could leave this property without authorization. Standing before it, now shivering in a stolen coat that smelled of grease, I realized the cruel irony. I had built a castle so secure that I could not get back into it. We crouched behind a rusted dumpster about 50 yards from the main gate. The wind howled through the chain links, making the fence sing a metallic, ghostly song. I leaned against the cold metal of the dumpster, gasping for breath. My chest felt tight and my heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I wiped the sweat from my forehead, my hand trembling. "This is it," Luis whispered, his eyes scanning the perimeter. "But we have a problem, Harry. That fence is 12 feet high, and unless you have been hiding a jetpack under that coat, there is no way you are climbing it." He was right. I looked at the fence. It might as well have been the Great Wall of China. My arms were weak, my grip strength non-existent on the left side. I could barely lift a spoon, let alone pull my own body weight over razor wire. "You go," I wheezed, hatred for my own frailty burning in my gut. "I will keep watch. You get the evidence." "No," Luis said firmly, shaking his head. "You said you know where the records are. You said the office is a maze. If I go in there blind, I will trip an alarm in 10 seconds. We go together or we do not go at all." He turned his back to me and knelt down in the snow. "Get on," he said. I stared at him. "Get on." "Yeah, get on my back," he gritted out. "I used to carry 80-pound sacks of cement for construction jobs before I started driving. You are nothing but skin and bones, old man. Now get on before the patrol comes around." The humiliation washed over me, hot and stinging. I was Harrison Caldwell. I had been carried on the shoulders of giants, not on the back of a homeless man I had just met. But I had no choice. Pride was a luxury I could no longer afford. I wrapped my arms around his neck, smelling the stale scent of the streets on his hoodie. Luis grunted as he stood up, hitching my weight up on his hips. We moved toward the fence. There was a section where the ground had eroded slightly, leaving a small gap, but not enough to crawl under. Luis approached the mesh. He reached up his fingers, hooking into the steel links. He began to climb. I held my breath, every muscle in my body tense. I felt the strain in his shoulders, the way his muscles bunched and quivered under the weight. The fence rattled. I looked up at the razor wire looming above us. If he slipped, if his strength gave out, we would be shredded. We reached the top. Luis pulled a thick pair of leather gloves from his pocket, the kind drivers use for fueling. He draped his coat over the razor wire to create a bridge. With a grunt of exertion that sounded like a growl, he heaved himself over, dragging me with him. We tumbled down the other side, landing hard on the frozen asphalt. The impact jarred my spine, sending a bolt of pain shooting down my bad leg. I bit my tongue to keep from screaming. We were inside. But we were not safe. We scrambled into the shadow of a stack of shipping containers. Ahead of us, the main yard opened up. It was a sea of metal boxes arranged in precise rows, and sweeping across the open space were the red beams of the security cameras. Luis froze, pulling me back into the darkness. "Thermal cameras," he hissed. "They will pick up our body heat in seconds. We cannot cross the open ground." "We are stuck." I looked at the camera mounted on the corner of the nearest warehouse. It was a sleek black unit slowly panning left and right. I recognized the model. The Cyclops 5000. Top-of-the-line, military-grade thermal imaging. It could spot a rabbit at 300 yards. Luis was already looking for a retreat route. "We have to go back," he whispered. "We cannot beat thermals." "Wait," I said, reaching out to grab his arm. My voice was breathless but steady. "Wait." I stared at the camera. I watched it pan to the left, then sweep back to the right. It stopped for a fraction of a second at the end of its arc before reversing. "See that?" I pointed. "See what?" Luis asked, tension making his voice sharp. "It is scanning everything." "No," I said, a dry smile cracking my lips. "It is not." "Watch the arc. It stops at 270 degrees. It does not do the full 360. Luis frowned, squinting at the device. "Why?" "Because I am cheap," I said, the confession tasting strange on my tongue. 10 years ago, when we installed this system, the contractor told me that to get the full 360-degree coverage, we needed a specialized slip ring cable that allowed the camera to rotate continuously without tangling the wires. It cost $500 extra per unit. I paused, watching the red light sweep again. "We were installing 40 cameras." I continued. "That was $20,000. I wanted to save the money to boost the quarterly dividend by a fraction of a cent. So I told them to use the standard static cables. That means the camera has a physical stop. It cannot rotate past a certain point, or it would snap its own wire." I looked at Luis, seeing the disbelief in his eyes. "There is a blind spot, Luis. At the 3 o'clock position relative to the lens. A 15-degree wedge of darkness where the camera is blind, because I wanted to save $500 on a cable." Luis looked at me, then back at the camera. He shook his head, a mixture of disgust and admiration on his face. "You rich people," he muttered. "Your greed is going to save our lives." It was true. The very avarice that had made me a monster to my employees was now my salvation. I pointed to the narrow strip of shadow that ran along the side of the warehouse wall. "Stick to the wall," I instructed. "Move only when the camera swings left. When it hits the right stop, we have exactly 4 seconds before it swings back. That is the window." Luis nodded. He helped me up. We moved like ghosts. "Wait, move, wait, move." We hugged the cold, corrugated metal of the warehouse wall, slipping through the invisible crack in the system that my frugality had created. It was terrifying. One misstep 1 second too slow and the alarm would sound, bringing armed guards down on us within minutes. We reached the side door of the main warehouse. It was a heavy steel fire door, locked obviously. But I knew this building too. I knew that the magnetic lock on this specific door had a habit of failing when the temperature dropped below zero because the metal frame contracted more than the magnet. I had signed off on the maintenance deferral for that too. "Pull hard," I whispered to Luis. "Don't pick it. Just yank it." Luis gripped the handle. He braced his foot against the wall and pulled with all his might. The metal groaned, ice cracked, and then with a pop, the magnetic seal broke. The door swung open. We slipped inside, the darkness swallowing us whole. The warehouse was cavernous. It smelled of diesel sawdust and ozone. Rows of shelving stretched up into the gloom, stacked high with pallets wrapped in black plastic. This was it. The staging area. If Preston was smuggling anything, it would be here waiting to be loaded onto the trucks. We stood still for a moment, letting our eyes adjust to the dim light filtering in from the skylights. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought it would echo in the vast space. We had done it. We were in the belly of the beast. "Check the labels," I whispered to Luis. "Look for the export codes I told you about." Luis took a step forward, reaching for his flashlight. Clack! The sound was sharp and distinct. It came from the other side of the aisle near the loading bay. We both froze statues in the dark. It was the sound of a boot heel striking concrete. A heavy, purposeful step. Then another. Clack! Clack! Someone was here. We were not alone. I grabbed Luis's sleeve, pulling him behind a stack of crates. We held our breath, pressing ourselves against the wood. The footsteps were getting closer, slow and rhythmic. It was not a worker. Workers move fast. This was a patrol. And then a beam of light cut through the darkness, sweeping across the floor just inches from my boots. I looked at Luis. His hand went to his pocket, gripping a heavy wrench he had brought. I shook my head frantically. No violence. Not unless we had to. The footsteps stopped right on the other side of the crates. I could hear the guard breathing. I could hear the static of a radio on his belt. "Did you hear?" that a voice spoke low and rough. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying to a God I had ignored for years. We were trapped. And the only thing separating us from capture was a few inches of plywood and the silence of two men who had nothing left to lose. We scrambled into the dark maw of the container just seconds before the beam of the guard flashlight swept across the metal doors. I pulled the heavy steel handle shut from the inside, plunging us into absolute blackness. My heart was beating so hard against my ribs, I was sure the sound would give us away. We stood there, frozen, two statues in the dark, listening. The heavy footsteps outside slowed down. I heard the guard pause right in front of our hiding place. The beam of his light played across the cracks in the doorframe, a thin slice of illumination that cut through the dusty air. He coughed a wet, rattling sound, and then his radio crackled. "Sector 4 is clear," the guard muttered, "moving to the perimeter check." His footsteps retreated, fading into the rhythmic hum of the distant warehouse machinery. I let out a breath I did not know I had been holding, sagging against the cold metal wall. Luis clicked on his small flashlight, keeping the beam pointed low at the floor to avoid alerting anyone outside. "We are safe for now," Luis whispered, though his voice was tight with tension. "But we cannot stay here long. They will circle back." I looked around the container. It was not empty. In fact, it did not look like a shipping container at all. It looked like a field office. There was a folding table set up in the center, a battery-powered lantern, and stacks of plastic crates lining the walls. But what caught my eye was the paperwork scattered across the table. It was a chaotic mess of manifests, shipping labels, and invoices. "Shine the light here." I commanded softly, moving toward the table. Luis obliged, bringing the beam to rest on the papers. My hands, still trembling slightly from the exertion of the climb, picked up a clipboard. I adjusted my glasses, squinting at the fine print. I knew these forms. I had designed the template myself 20 years ago, but the data on them made no sense. "This is a manifest for kitchen appliances," I muttered, tracing the lines with a dirty fingernail. "Commercial blenders, high-speed mixers. Destination is a port in Sudan." "Sudan?" Luis asked, confused. "Why are we shipping high-end blenders to a war zone?" "Exactly," I said. "It does not add up." I picked up another sheet. It was a technical specification for the cargo. My eyes scanned the SKU numbers. 3D poly-ABS, high-density filament, motor housing units. I walked over to one of the open crates. It was filled with gray plastic components. To the untrained eye, they looked like innocent parts of a machine housing, just molded plastic. But I was not an untrained eye. I had started my career on the factory floor. I knew manufacturing. I picked up one of the pieces. It was heavy, too heavy for a blender casing, and the shape was wrong. It was curved with intricate internal grooves that had nothing to do with mixing food. I fit two of the pieces together. They locked with a satisfying click. I turned it over in my hands. It was not a motor housing. It was a receiver. A lower receiver for an automatic rifle. "Luis," I said, my voice dropping to a graveyard whisper. "These are not blenders." Luis stepped closer, looking at the plastic object in my hand. "What are they?" I looked at the manifest again. Then I looked at the crate. "It is a ghost gun," I said, the realization turning my blood to ice. 3D printed weapons. They are shipping the components disassembled. The plastic parts pass through metal detectors and X-ray scanners as harmless kitchen appliances. The metal firing pins and barrels are probably hidden inside the motors of the actual blenders in the other crates. I looked at Luis, seeing the horror dawn on his face. "Preston is not just smuggling waste," I continued, my voice shaking with rage. "He is running an international arms dealing operation. He is supplying untraceable weapons to militias in conflict zones. And he is using my company, my trucks, and my name to do it. This went beyond greed. This was blood money. Every crate in this room represented innocent lives that would be taken by a gun that technically did not exist." I grabbed the ledger from the table. It was a thick, spiral-bound notebook. I flipped through it. It contained dates, payments, and the real names of the buyers. This was it. This was the smoking gun. If we could get this to the FBI, Preston would never see the light of day again. "We have what we need," I said, clutching the notebook to my chest like a shield. "Let us get out of here." I turned toward the door, reaching for the handle. Suddenly, a loud mechanical clank echoed from the outside of the container. The floor beneath us vibrated violently. "What was that?" Luis asked, spinning around. Before I could answer, a deep roaring hum filled the air. It sounded like a jet engine starting up. The lights on the control panel near the ceiling flickered to life, glowing an angry red. And then the cold hit us. It was not a gradual cooling. It was an instant biting blast of frigid air that poured from the vents above. "They turned on the reefer unit," I shouted over the roar of the compressor. "This is a refrigerated container!" Why, Luis yelled back, pulling his hood up. To test it, I realized with horror. Or maybe they are preparing it for shipment. It does not matter. We are trapped inside. The temperature plummeted. I could see my breath in the air, thick white clouds puffing out with every word. The metal walls, already cool, began to frost over within seconds. This unit was designed to flash freeze meat and produce. It could drop the temperature to 20 below zero in less than 10 minutes. I felt a tightness in my chest that had nothing to do with the cold. It was my heart. The shock of the temperature change was constricting my blood vessels, forcing my damaged cardiovascular system to work overtime. My left arm began to ache, a dull throb that radiated up to my jaw. Harry Luis grabbed my shoulder. "You are turning blue." I leaned against the table, gasping for air. The cold was searing my lungs. It felt like I was inhaling broken glass. "The door," I wheezed. "Try the door." Luis threw himself at the steel doors. He grabbed the release handle and yanked. It did not budge. He kicked it. He slammed his shoulder against it. "It is locked from the outside," he shouted, panic edging into his voice. "Or the vacuum seal is too strong. I cannot open it." I sank to my knees. My legs would no longer hold me. The cold was seeping through my thin, stolen coat, biting into my bones. My vision began to blur at the edges. I clutched the ledger tighter. I could not die here. Not now. Not when I had the truth in my hands. Luis looked around frantically. His eyes landed on a metal pry bar lying in the corner, probably left by the same careless worker who left the paperwork. He grabbed it. "Hold on, Harry," he gritted out. "Do not close your eyes." He jammed the flat end of the pry bar into the seam between the doors. He braced his foot against the wall and pulled. The veins in his neck bulged. He roared with effort, a primal sound of defiance against the machine. The metal groaned. The ice that had already begun to form on the seal cracked with a sharp snap. "Come on!" Luis screamed at the door. "Open!" I watched him through half-closed eyes. He was fighting for my life. He was fighting for a man he had met in a soup kitchen. With a final explosive crack, the latch gave way. The pressure seal broke and the door swung open a few inches. Luis dropped the bar and grabbed me. He did not ask if I could walk. He hauled me up, his grip like iron. He kicked the door wide open, and we tumbled out onto the warehouse floor. The air in the warehouse was cold, but compared to the Arctic hell of the container, it felt like a tropical breeze. I lay on the concrete, gasping, trying to force my heart to slow down. Luis was beside me, breathing hard, checking the hallway. "We are alive," he whispered. I looked down at my hand. My fingers were white and stiff, but they were still curled around the notebook. "We have it," I whispered back, my voice weak but triumphant. "We have the end of Preston Caldwell." But we were not out yet. The noise of the reefer unit had masked our escape, but it would also draw attention. A mechanic would be coming to check the diagnostics soon. "We have to move," Luis said, pulling me to my feet. "Can you stand?" I nodded, though my body screamed in protest. I forced myself upright. I was Harrison Caldwell. I had survived corporate raiders, market crashes, and a stroke. I would not let a little frostbite stop me now. "Lead the way," I said. We moved back into the shadows, leaving the roaring container behind us, carrying the evidence that would burn my son's empire to the ground. We walked for another hour to reach the 12th precinct. The adrenaline that had fueled our escape from the warehouse was fading, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion that made every step a conscious effort. My hands were still clutching the ledger against my chest, the spiral binding digging into my skin. It was painful, but it was a good pain. It was the weight of truth. In my naive mind, I thought the hard part was over. I thought that once we crossed the threshold of the police station, the nightmare would end. I believed in the system because the system had always worked for me. But I had forgotten that the system looks very different when you are standing at the bottom looking up than when you are sitting at the top looking down. The station was warm, brightly lit, and smelled of floor wax and stale coffee. To a freezing man, it should have felt like a sanctuary. Instead, it felt like a waiting room for purgatory. We approached the high front desk. Behind it sat a sergeant with a thick neck and eyes that had seen too much and cared too little. His nameplate read, Sergeant Kowalski. He did not look up when we approached. He was busy typing on a computer with 2 fingers, his face illuminated by the blue glow of the screen. "Excuse me, officer," I said. My voice was raspy, but I tried to inject the authority of a CEO into it. I tried to stand up straight to hide the fact that I was wearing a stolen coat that was 3 sizes too big. Kowalski stopped typing. He slowly turned his head. His eyes swept over Luis, lingering on his hoodie and his dark, unshaven face. Then they moved to me, taking in my dirty gray hair and the tremor in my hands. He did not see a witness. He did not see a whistleblower. He saw 2 problems. "We do not have any open beds for the night," Kowalski said, his voice flat and bored. "The shelter on 5th is full. Try the Salvation Army down on Cicero." "I am not looking for a bed," I said, placing the ledger on the counter. "I am here to report a felony, a massive international smuggling operation involving illegal weapons and hazardous waste." Kowalski looked at the notebook, then back at me. A smirk tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Illegal weapons," he repeated, clearly amused. "And let me guess. The CIA is beaming messages into your fillings, too. Look, Pops, go sleep it off somewhere else. We are busy." I felt a flash of the old anger, the impatience I used to feel when a subordinate came to a meeting unprepared. "This is not a joke," I snapped, pushing the book closer to him. "This is the shipping ledger for Caldwell Logistics. It contains the names of buyers, dates of illegal shipments, and the serial numbers of 3D printed firearm components disguised as kitchen appliances. I have just come from the yard. I saw it with my own eyes." The sergeant's expression changed. It did not soften. It hardened. He reached out and flipped the book open. He glanced at a page, then looked at the C-level executive stamp on the header. "Caldwell Logistics," he said slowly. "That is a billion-dollar company, and you are telling me that you, a guy who looks like he just crawled out of a dumpster, have their internal financial records." "I am Harrison Caldwell," I stated firmly. "I am the founder of that company." Kowalski laughed. It was a loud barking sound that echoed in the quiet lobby. "Right," he said, shaking his head. "And I am the Queen of England. Harrison Caldwell is in a private care facility recovering from a stroke. I saw it on the news. You are just a confused old drunk who stole a notebook from somewhere." He closed the ledger with a heavy thud and slid it away from me behind the glass partition. "I will take this as evidence," he said, his tone turning menacing. "Evidence of theft. Now get out of here before I book you both for possession of stolen property and public intoxication." Luis slammed his hand on the counter. The sound was like a gunshot. "You give that back," Luis shouted, his voice cracking with rage. "We risked our lives for that. You are supposed to help us. You are a cop. Do your job." Kowalski stood up. He was big, and his hand dropped instinctively to the taser on his belt. "Back off, dirtbag," Kowalski warned. "I will not ask twice." Luis leaned forward, his fists clenched, ready to vault over the counter. I saw the violence in his eyes. He was ready to fight the entire police force. He was ready to throw his life away right here in the lobby because he was tired of being unheard. "No," I whispered. I grabbed Luis's arm. I felt his muscles vibrating with tension. "Luis, stop," I said, my voice sharp and commanding. "We leave. Now." "But he has the book," Luis hissed, looking at me like I was crazy. "He does not have the proof," I said, staring into Kowalski's eyes. "He just has paper. The truth is in here." I tapped my temple. "Come on," I pulled him back. We walked out of the station. The heavy doors swung shut behind us, cutting off the warmth. We were back on the street. The wind seemed colder now, more biting. The despair hit me harder than the frost. I had played my trump card. I had gone to the authorities, and they had laughed in my face. Luis kicked a trash can, sending it skittering across the icy sidewalk. "We lost!" He yelled, his breath puffing out in white clouds. "That was it, Harry. That was our chance. Now that cop is going to call Caldwell. Preston will know we have the book. He will burn everything. We are dead." I leaned against the brick wall of the station, closing my eyes. I felt a crushing weight on my chest. Was he right? Was I just a delusional old man fighting a war I had already lost? Maybe Preston was right to lock me away. Maybe I was finished. Then, through the fog of my hopelessness, a memory surfaced. It was a memory of a courtroom 5 years ago. I was sitting at the defendant's table surrounded by a team of high-priced corporate lawyers in $1,000 suits. Across the aisle sat a lone woman. She was wearing a cheap suit, her hair pulled back in a severe bun, her desk piled high with disorganized files. She was a public defender representing a group of warehouse workers I had fired. My lawyers had laughed at her. They called her a gnat. They said she would settle in a day. But she didn't settle. She fought. She cross-examined me for 4 hours. She tore apart my logic. She exposed the loopholes I had used. She was relentless. She was terrifying. I hated her back then. I called her a menace to business. I used every resource I had to bury her in paperwork and delays until she finally ran out of funds and had to drop the case. I remembered the look she gave me on the last day of court. She didn't look defeated. She looked at me with a burning righteous anger and said, "You may have won today, Mr. Caldwell, but eventually gravity catches up with everyone." I opened my eyes. "We are not dead yet," I said softly. Luis looked at me, his anger simmering down to exhaustion. "What are you talking about? The cops won't help us. The cops are part of the machinery," I said. "They respect power, and right now we don't have any. We need someone who hates power. We need someone who is not afraid of the system because she has spent her whole life fighting it." I pushed myself off the wall. My legs felt stronger. The plan was forming in my mind, clear and sharp. "Who?" Luis asked. "Sarah Miller," I said. "The lawyer who sued you?" Luis asked, confused. "You told me about her. You said you ruined her career. Why would she help you?" "Because she hates me," I said, a grim smile spreading across my face. "And she hates Preston even more. She is the only person in this city crazy enough to take this case and smart enough to win it. She is a pit bull, Luis, and I am going to hand her the biggest stake she has ever seen." I started walking down the street, turning my collar up against the wind. "Where are we going?" Luis called out, jogging to catch up. "To the courthouse archives," I said. "I need to find her address, and then I am going to beg for forgiveness." It was a long shot. It was a desperate Hail Mary pass. But as we walked into the night, I realized that for the first time in my life, I wasn't relying on my money or my influence. I was relying on the integrity of a woman I had once tried to destroy. And if there was any justice left in this world, that would be enough. The address I found in the public records led us away from the city center and deep into a neighborhood where the streetlights flickered and the storefronts were covered in iron grates. It was a far cry from the glass and steel tower where I used to look down on the world. Sarah Miller's office was located in the basement of a converted laundromat. The sign on the door was small and peeling, simply reading, "Sarah Miller, Attorney at Law." There were no marble floors here, no receptionists with headsets, no espresso machines. There was just a heavy metal door that scraped against the concrete when I pushed it open. Inside the office was a chaotic fortress of paper. Stacks of case files lined the walls from floor to ceiling, creating narrow pathways through the room. The air smelled of dust and old coffee. In the center of this paper labyrinth sat Sarah. She looked older than I remembered. There were streaks of gray in her hair and deep lines etched around her mouth, but her eyes were the same. Sharp, intelligent, and currently wide with shock as they landed on me. She stood up slowly, dropping the pen she was holding. She looked at my dirty coat, my unkempt beard, and the shivering young man standing behind me. Then her gaze hardened into steel. "Harrison Caldwell," she said, her voice flat and cold. "Hello, Sarah," I said quietly, closing the door behind us to shut out the wind. She walked around her desk, crossing her arms. "This is a joke, right? Is this some kind of hidden camera show? The great tycoon dressing up as a bum to see how the other half lives? It is not a costume, Sarah, I said, stepping into the light. And it is not a joke. I lost everything. Lost. My son took the company. He took my home. He left me to rot in a state facility. Sarah let out a short, bitter laugh. She leaned back against her desk, shaking her head. Karma, she said. It took 5 years, but it finally showed up. Do you know how many people I represent who lost everything because of you, Harrison? Do you know how many families broke apart because you decided to cut benefits to save a nickel on the share price? And now you want what? Sympathy. You came to the wrong place. Get out of my office. She pointed to the door, her hand trembling slightly with suppressed anger. I did not move. I deserved that. I deserved every ounce of her venom. I know, I said, my voice steady. I was a ruthless man. I crushed people. I crushed you. And if I were here to ask you to save me, I would expect you to throw me out into the snow. But I am not here for me. I stepped aside, revealing Luis. He stood there, hood down, clutching his own arms for warmth, his eyes wary. This is Luis, I said. It's Iowa. He was one of my best drivers. My son framed him for drug possession because Luis refused to drive illegal routes. He went to prison for 18 months. He lost his truck, his license, and his life. Sarah looked at Luis. Her expression softened just a fraction. It was the instinct of a public defender, the automatic pivot toward the underdog. And he is not the only one. I continued, taking the ledger from under my coat. I placed the notebook on her cluttered desk. It landed with a heavy thud. Preston is not just cutting benefits anymore, Sarah. He is not just firing people. He is smuggling. Sarah looked at the book, then back at me. Smuggling what? Drugs. Worse, I said. Weapons. I watched her face as the word hung in the air. She hesitated, then reached out and opened the ledger. I saw her lawyer brain engaging. She scanned the columns, the dates, the shipping codes. These are export manifests, she muttered, flipping the pages. Kitchen appliances. Sudan. Yemen. Syria. Look at the weight ratios, I said, pointing to the column I had analyzed in the container. And look at the buyer names. I cross-referenced them in my head. These are not wholesalers. They are shell companies. Sarah pulled a magnifying glass from her drawer, leaning over the paper. She was silent for a long time. The only sound in the room was the hum of the refrigerator in the corner and the wind howling outside. Finally, she looked up. The hatred was gone from her eyes, replaced by a look of sheer, terrifying focus. Ghost guns, she whispered. The components are plastic. The motors hide the firing pins. I nodded. We broke into the yard tonight. We saw them. Sarah closed the book. She took a deep breath, pacing the small space of her office. She ran her hands through her hair, her mind racing through statutes and precedents. This is big, she said. This is RICO territory. International arms trafficking, conspiracy, fraud. If this is true, Preston is looking at life in federal prison without parole. Then take the case, I said. Take him down. You are the only one who can do it, Sarah. The police laughed at us. They saw 2 bums and kicked us out. But they will listen to you. You know the law better than anyone I have ever met. She stopped pacing and looked at me. There was a complex emotion in her eyes. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a truce. You realize the irony here, right? She asked. You spent millions trying to destroy my reputation. You called me incompetent. You called me a communist. And now you are handing me the biggest case of my career. I lowered my head. I was wrong about a lot of things, Sarah. I thought power was about money. I thought strength was about never apologizing. I am learning that I knew nothing about being a man. Sarah stared at me for a moment longer. Then she sighed. She walked back to her desk and sat down, opening her laptop. Okay, she said, typing furiously. I will take the case. But not for you, Harrison. I am doing it for Luis. And I am doing it because if I let a man like Preston flood the world with untraceable weapons, I won't be able to sleep at night. Thank you. Exhaled, feeling my knees go weak with relief. Do not thank me yet, she said, holding up a hand. We have a problem. This ledger is great intel, but legally it is weak. It is hearsay. And since you stole it, the defense will argue chain of custody issues. They will say you forged it. They will say you are a disgruntled former executive with a history of stroke-induced mental instability. Preston has already set the narrative that you are senile. So what do we need? Luis asked, speaking up for the first time. We need a smoking gun, Sarah said. We need indisputable visual proof. We need to catch him in the act. We need to see the guns being loaded. We need to see Preston authorizing it. We need a video that no jury can ignore. I slumped into a chair. We can't go back to the yard, I said. They will have doubled the guard. They know someone was there. Sarah tapped her pen on the desk, thinking. She turned her computer screen toward us. You might not have to break in, she said. Look at this. I leaned forward. It was a digital invitation on the Caldwell Logistics website. The annual Caldwell Foundation Gala, she read aloud. Tomorrow night. It is being held at the main distribution hub. Preston is trying to rebrand the company as a philanthropic leader. He is inviting the press, the mayor, and half the city council to show off his new charity initiatives. I read the text. He is transforming Warehouse 4 into a ballroom for the night. Warehouse 4, I said, realizing the implication. That is where we found the guns. That is where the container is. Exactly him, Sarah said, her eyes gleaming. He is hiding in plain sight. He is going to be standing on a stage, talking about saving the world, while the weapons are sitting right behind the curtain, probably being prepped for the next shipment. If we can get in there, Luis said, and if we can get cameras backstage. I looked at the screen. I saw Preston's face smiling confidently. He thought he was untouchable. He thought he could dance on the graves of the people he exploited. I can get us in, I said, a plan forming in my mind. I know the security protocols for events because I wrote them. The staff entrance. The catering trucks. Sarah looked at me, and for the first time in 5 years, she smiled. It was a sharp, dangerous smile. Then we are going to a party, she said. Luis, do you know how to use a hidden camera? Luis nodded, cracking his knuckles. I can learn. Good, Sarah said, standing up and grabbing her coat. Harrison, you need a shave. And a suit. If we are going to crash your son's party, we are going to do it with style. And when we are done, he won't just be fired. He will be famous. I looked at my reflection in the dark window of her office. The tired old man was fading. In his place was something harder, something colder. I was about to walk back into the world I built, but this time I wasn't coming to lead it. I was coming to burn it down. The transformation of Warehouse 4 was nothing short of a miracle of deception. 2 days ago, this space had been a cold industrial tomb filled with the echoing sounds of forklifts and the smell of diesel fumes. Tonight, it was a palace. Preston had draped heavy velvet curtains over the steel walls, hiding the racking systems that held his illicit inventory. Crystal chandeliers hung from the support beams, casting a warm golden glow over the polished concrete floor. There were round tables covered in white linen, topped with elaborate floral centerpieces that smelled of lilies and money. It was the Caldwell Foundation Gala, and every important person in Chicago was here to celebrate the philanthropy of my son. They were drinking expensive champagne and eating shrimp cocktails, completely unaware that they were standing on top of an international arms-dealing operation. I stood in the shadows of the staff entrance, adjusting the cuffs of the suit Sarah had found for me at a thrift store. It was a little tight across the shoulders, and the fabric was worn at the elbows, but it was clean. Sarah stood beside me, looking unrecognizable. She had traded her messy bun and oversized blazer for a sleek black evening gown she had borrowed from a friend. She looked dangerous. She looked like a shark swimming into a school of goldfish. "Remember the plan, Harrison?" she whispered, checking her earpiece. "We just need to keep them busy. Keep eyes on us." Luis is already moving toward the loading dock. He needs 10 minutes to get the footage of the active packing line behind the curtain. I nodded, my throat dry. "I am ready, Sarah." We stepped out of the shadows and into the light. The noise of the party washed over us, a wall of polite chatter and string quartet music. I felt a wave of nausea. These were my peers. I recognized faces in the crowd. There was Councilman Miller, who I had supported in the last election. There was Robert Jenkins, one of my oldest board members, laughing near the bar. They were all smiling at Preston, who was standing on a raised stage holding a microphone looking like the prince of the city. "Welcome, everyone," Preston's voice boomed over the speakers, smooth and charismatic. "Tonight is about giving back. It is about extending our reach to those who have been forgotten." The crowd applauded. I clenched my fists. The hypocrisy was a physical blow. He was talking about saving lives while shipping weapons that would end them. We moved into the crowd. I kept my head high, walking with the gait of a man who owned the building because technically I still did. I grabbed 2 glasses of champagne from a passing waiter. I handed one to Sarah. "Smile," I murmured. "We are having a lovely time." We began to mingle. It was a surreal experience. I was a ghost walking among the living. People glanced at me, their eyes sliding away, assuming I was just another old donor they should know, but didn't. I steered us toward the front near the stage. I wanted Preston to see me. I wanted to see the fear in his eyes when he realized the dead man was walking. My earpiece crackled. It was Luis, his voice a breathless whisper against the thumping of my pulse. "I am in the ventilation shaft," he said. "I can see the back room. They are moving the crates. I see the guns, Harry. They are packing them into the blender boxes right now. I am getting it all." "Keep filming, Luis," I whispered back, pretending to sip my drink. "Do not stop until you have a clear shot of the shipping labels." I looked up at the stage. Preston was wrapping up his speech. "And to think this all started with a simple dream," he said, placing a hand over his heart. "A dream my father had. A dream I am proud to continue even as his health declines." The audacity took my breath away. He was using my name to sanitize his crimes. Suddenly the crowd parted to my left. A woman was making her way toward the bar, surrounded by a gaggle of admirers. It was Tiffany, my daughter-in-law. She was wearing a red dress that screamed for attention, dripping in diamonds that I had likely paid for. She looked radiant and cruel. She was laughing at something a friend said, her head thrown back until her eyes swept over the crowd and landed on me. Her laughter died instantly. She froze. Her glass of wine tilted dangerously in her hand. She squinted, thinking her eyes were playing tricks on her. She thought I was locked away in shady pines, drooling on myself. She blinked, hoping the hallucination would vanish. But I did not vanish. I raised my glass to her and offered a small, cold smile. The color drained from her face, leaving her pale beneath her heavy makeup. She didn't scream at first. She just stared. Then the shock turned to indignation. How dare I? How dare I crash her moment? How dare I exist? She marched toward me, pushing people out of her way. Her heels clicked sharply on the floor, a staccato rhythm of impending disaster. "You," she hissed when she was close enough for me to smell the expensive gin on her breath. "What are you doing here?" "Hello, Tiffany," I said, my voice calm. "Lovely party. The decorations are exquisite. Did you use the money from selling my house to pay for the flowers?" Her eyes bulged. She looked at my suit, noting the frayed cuffs. She looked at Sarah, who was standing protectively at my side. "You are supposed to be in the home," she spat, her voice rising. "You are sick. You are mentally unstable. Preston told us you were dangerous." "I am dangerous, Tiffany," I said, leaning in. but not in the way you think." She stepped back, revulsion twisting her features. She looked around, realizing people were starting to stare. She decided to play the victim. She decided to do exactly what we needed her to do. She decided to make a scene. "Security," she shrieked, her voice piercing the ambient noise of the room. "Security, get over here!" The string quartet stopped playing. The conversation in the hall died down to a hush. Hundreds of heads turned in our direction. Preston stopped speaking mid-sentence on stage, shielding his eyes against the spotlight to see what was happening. Tiffany pointed a manicured finger at me, trembling with rage. "There is a beggar in here," she yelled so everyone could hear. "He is harassing me. He snuck in from the street. Look at him. He is filthy. Get him out." A murmur went through the crowd. I heard the word beggar whispered in shock. I stood my ground. I did not shrink. I did not look at the floor. I looked straight ahead at the stage. 4 security guards materialized from the edges of the room. They were big men with earpieces and serious faces. They pushed through the guests, closing in on me. Sarah stepped forward, trying to intervene, but I put a hand on her arm. "It is okay," I said softly. "Let them come." The guards surrounded me, forming a wall of black suits. One of them reached out, grabbing my arm roughly. "Sir, you need to come with us," he said, his voice low and threatening. "Do not make this difficult." I shook his hand off. It was a sharp, authoritative movement that surprised him. I adjusted my jacket, straightening the lapels. I took a slow, deliberate breath. "I am not going anywhere," I said, my voice projecting to the back of the room. "Not until I say hello to the host." I looked up at the stage. Preston had stepped down from the podium and was walking to the edge of the platform, peering into the dim light. He looked annoyed at the interruption, concerned about the optics of his perfect evening being ruined. Then he saw me. He saw the gray hair. He saw the posture. He saw the eyes that had watched him grow up. His face went slack. The microphone dropped to his side, hitting his leg with a thud that echoed through the speakers. He looked like he had seen a ghost. Harrison Sarah whispered, her voice urgent. "Luis says he has the shot. He is uploading it to the cloud now. We have it." The trap was sprung. The evidence was secure. Now all that was left was the revelation. The guards moved to grab me again, but I held up a hand. "Wait!" Preston shouted from the stage, his voice cracking. "Wait!" He scrambled down the stairs, almost tripping. He ran through the crowd, pushing donors aside. He stopped 5 feet from me. He looked at Tiffany, who was still hyperventilating. He looked at the guards. And then he looked at me. "Dad." He whispered, his face pale with shock. I smiled. It was the smile of a father who is about to teach his child the most painful lesson of his life. "Hello, son," I said, my voice ringing out clearly in the silent warehouse. "I am back, and I brought a few friends to your party." Preston looked down at me from the stage, and for a second I saw the terrified boy who used to hide behind my legs during thunderstorms. But that vulnerability vanished as quickly as it had appeared, replaced by the mask of the corporate sociopath I had allowed him to become. He laughed. It was a practiced, sorrowful sound that echoed through the silent warehouse. He shook his head slowly, looking out at the confused crowd of donors and politicians, with eyes full of fake tears. "Ladies and gentlemen, please forgive this interruption," he said, his voice trembling with a perfect performance of grief. "This is my father. As many of you know, he has been battling severe health issues. The stroke took a heavy toll, not just on his body, but on his mind. It is heartbreaking to see him like this. He suffers from paranoid delusions. He wanders off. He forgets who he is." He gestured to the security guards with a subtle flick of his wrist. "Please escort him to the quiet room," Preston commanded gently. "Call his doctors. He needs his medication. We will get him the help he needs." "I am so sorry, everyone." Dementia is a cruel thief. The crowd murmured in sympathy. I saw pity in their eyes. They looked at my shabby suit, my wild hair, and they saw exactly what Preston wanted them to see. A broken old man losing his mind. The guards moved in their hands, heavy on my shoulders. One of them gripped my bicep hard enough to bruise. "Come on, Pops," the guard whispered in my ear. "Do not make a scene. Let us go." I did not struggle. I did not scream. I just looked at my watch. It was a cheap plastic digital watch I had bought at the thrift store, but it kept perfect time. "I am not the one who is confused, Preston," I said, my voice calm enough to cut through the murmuring crowd. "And I am not the one who forgot who owns this building." Preston sighed, holding the microphone like a scepter. "Dad, please. This is embarrassing. Just go." I looked up at the massive projection screen behind him. It was currently displaying a slideshow of smiling children and the Caldwell Foundation logo. A slide about global outreach was fading into one about community support. I counted down in my head. 3, 2, 1. "Now, Luis," I whispered. The air in the warehouse changed instantly. A loud screech of audio feedback tore through the speakers, making everyone cover their ears. Preston flinched, dropping the microphone to his side. The screen behind him flickered violently. The smiling children dissolved into static. The polite blue logo distorted, and then the image cut to black. A second later, a new feed appeared. It was not a slide. It was raw, shaky handheld video. The crowd gasped. The image on the screen was dark but clear. It showed the interior of a shipping container. Not just any container. It was the one sitting directly behind the heavy velvet curtains at the back of this very room. The timestamp in the corner of the screen was current. It was happening right now. On the screen, a gloved hand reached out and smashed a wooden crate labeled "Kitchen Mixers." The wood splintered, revealing the gray plastic components inside. The hand picked one up and held it to the camera lens. It was a lower receiver for an AR-15. Then the camera panned to show hundreds of similar crates stacked high. Preston turned around slowly, following the gaze of the horrified audience. When he saw the screen, his knees buckled. He stumbled back, knocking over the podium. The microphone rolled across the stage with a thud that sounded like a gavel falling. "That is not dementia, Preston," I shouted, shaking off the guards, who were now too stunned to hold me. "That is a felony." The video feed changed. Now it showed the loading dock. It showed Luis standing there ripping the charity stickers off the boxes to reveal the hazard warnings underneath. And then the camera zoomed in on a document taped to the side of a pallet. A shipping manifest, with Preston's signature clearly visible at the bottom. The room erupted into chaos. The donors dropped their champagne glasses. The politicians began backing away, looking for the exits, trying to distance themselves from the radioactive fallout of the Caldwell name. Tiffany stood frozen in the crowd, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Preston scrambled for the microphone, his hands shaking so badly he almost dropped it again. "Turn it off!" he screamed at the tech booth, his voice cracking into a high-pitched squeal. "Cut the feed! It is a deep fake! It is AI generated! My father is doing this! He is crazy!" But the feed did not cut. Luis had locked the system out. The truth was looping, playing over and over again on the 40-foot screen. The guns, the waste, the signature. Then the side doors of the warehouse burst open. It was not security. It was a team of men and women in windbreakers with bold yellow letters on the back. FBI. Leading them was Sarah Miller. She walked into the chaos like a general entering a conquered city. She pointed directly at the stage. "Federal agents," she announced, her voice projecting without a microphone. "Nobody move. This is a crime scene." Preston looked for an escape route. He looked at the back curtain where his illegal empire was hidden. He looked at the side exits, which were now blocked by federal agents. He realized he was trapped in the cage of his own making. I walked up the stairs to the stage. My bad leg dragged slightly, but I felt stronger than I had in years. I walked past the overturned podium. I picked up the microphone. I stood next to my son. He was trembling, sweat pouring down his face, ruining his expensive makeup. He looked at me with eyes full of hate and fear. "You ruined everything," he hissed. "You senile old fool. Do you know how much money I was making?" I looked out at the crowd, at the cameras that were now flashing blindingly, capturing the fall of the House of Caldwell. Then I looked at Preston. "The only delusion here, Preston," I said, my voice booming through the warehouse, "is you thinking I would ever let you destroy the name I spent 40 years building. You thought I was weak because I was old. You thought I was stupid because I was kind. But you forgot one thing, son. I was a trucker before I was a CEO, and we know exactly how to handle trash." I dropped the microphone. It hit the floor with a final definitive thud. Sarah stepped onto the stage, flanked by 2 large agents. She pulled a pair of handcuffs from her belt. She did not hand them to the agents. She walked up to Preston herself. "Preston Caldwell," she said, savoring every syllable. "You are under arrest for arms trafficking, wire fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit murder. You have the right to remain silent. And I strongly suggest you use it, because for once your father is not going to bail you out." Preston didn't fight. He slumped forward, his spirit breaking under the weight of the handcuffs clicking around his wrists. He looked small. He looked pathetic. Down on the floor, I saw Tiffany trying to sneak away toward the kitchen exit, but 2 agents blocked her path. "Mrs. Caldwell," an agent said, "we have questions about your signature on the shell company accounts used to launder the proceeds." "No," she shrieked as they grabbed her arms. "I didn't know. He made me do it. I am a victim." I watched from the stage as they were both led away. The flashbulbs popped like fireworks. The crowd parted, making a wide path for the fallen royalty. I stood there alone on the platform, surrounded by the ruins of the gala. The video feed finally cut out, replaced by a simple blue screen. I looked down at my hands. They were still shaking, but not from fear. From relief. It was over. The cancer had been cut out. The company was in ruins, yes. The stock would crash tomorrow. The lawsuits would be endless. But the rot was gone. Sarah walked back to me. She looked tired but triumphant. She put a hand on my shoulder. "We did it, Harrison," she said softly. I looked at the empty spot where Preston had stood. I felt a pang of grief for the little boy he used to be, but it was quickly replaced by the peace of knowing that justice had been served. "Yeah," I said, watching the police lights flash against the warehouse walls. "We did it. Now let's go find Luis. I think he earned a job." I walked down the stairs, leaving the stage and the spotlight behind. I didn't need them anymore. I had my dignity back, and that was worth more than all the gold in the world. The smell of brewing coffee and frying bacon was better than any expensive cologne I had ever worn in my days as a CEO. I sat in a booth by the window at a small diner on the south side of Chicago, watching the morning sun melt the last of the winter snow on the sidewalk. It had been exactly 30 days since the night of the gala. 30 days since the police lights flashed against the warehouse walls, and my son was led away in handcuffs. The newspapers on the rack by the door still carried the story in the business section, but the headlines had shifted from shock to analysis. Caldwell Logistics was currently being dissected by federal auditors. The stock had plummeted, as I predicted, but the company would survive. It would survive because the board of directors, scrambling to save their own skins, had voted unanimously to cooperate with the investigation and purge the executive team Preston had installed. But I was not reading the business section. I was looking out the window at the parking lot. Parked right in the front row, shining like a diamond under the streetlights, was a brand new semi-truck. It was not red like the old Caldwell fleet. It was a deep midnight blue. And on the door, in simple silver letters, were the words, Second Chance Transport. The bell above the diner door jingled, and I looked up. Walking in was a man who looked nothing like the desperate, hooded figure I had met in a soup kitchen a month ago. Luis was clean-shaven. He stood tall, his shoulders back, his head held high. He was wearing a crisp blue uniform shirt with his name embroidered over the pocket. He looked like a professional. He looked like a man who had reclaimed his dignity. He slid into the booth opposite me, a wide grin splitting his face. "Morning, boss," he said. I smiled, sipping my coffee. "Don't call me Boss Luis. We are partners." Luis laughed, shaking his head. "I still can't believe it, Harry. I walked around the truck 3 times. She is a beauty. 500 horsepower. Leather interior. Automated logbooks that actually work. She is all yours," I said. "And the other 4 units in the yard are ready for the drivers you recommended." I had kept my promise. As soon as the legal dust began to settle, I liquidated my entire portfolio. I sold every single share of stock I owned in Caldwell Logistics. The lawyers told me I was crazy. They told me to hold on, that the value would bounce back. But I didn't want that money. It felt heavy. It felt dirty. So I cashed out. I took enough to live simply to pay for a small apartment near the lake, and the rest I poured into this. Second Chance Transport. It was a small operation, just 5 trucks to start. But our mission statement was unique. We didn't check criminal records for disqualification, we checked them for potential. We hired the guys nobody else would touch. The guys who made mistakes. The guys who got framed. The guys who just needed someone to believe that they were more than the worst thing they had ever done. Luis picked up the menu, but I knew he wasn't really reading it. He was looking at me with eyes that were shining with unshed tears. "You know, Harry," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper, "when I was in that cell, I used to dream about driving again. But I never thought it would happen. I thought my life was over. I thought I was trash." "You were never trash, Luis," I said, leaning forward. "You were just broken. And broken things can be fixed. Sometimes they end up stronger at the broken places." Sarah Miller walked in, then looking harried but happy. She was carrying a briefcase that looked slightly less chaotic than usual. She slid into the booth next to Luis, stealing a piece of toast from his plate. "Good news," she announced, chewing quickly. "The district attorney is pushing for the maximum sentence on Preston. With the video evidence and the ledger, he is looking at 20 years minimum. And Tiffany is turning state witness to reduce her sentence for the fraud charges." She is singing like a canary. I nodded, feeling a strange sense of detachment. I should have felt sad. He was my son, after all. But the man going to prison wasn't the boy I raised. He was a stranger consumed by greed. I would visit him eventually. Maybe in a year or 2, when the anger had faded. I would try to be a father to him again, but from the other side of the glass. For now, my family was sitting right here in this booth. "Here is the incorporation paperwork," Sarah continued, sliding a folder across the table. "You are officially the CEO of Second Chance Transport, Mr. Caldwell. But this time, the bylaws are written the way you wanted. Strict profit sharing for drivers, mandatory rest periods, and a clause that says the company can never be sold to a conglomerate." I signed the papers with a flourish. My hand didn't shake. The stroke had taken some of my mobility, but the fight with Preston had given me back my strength. I looked at Luis. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a set of keys. I placed them on the table. "Unit 1 is yours," I said. "You have the first run, a load of lumber going to Minnesota. It is honest freight, Luis. No hidden compartments, no ghost routes, just wood and the open road." Luis picked up the keys. He gripped them tight, his knuckles turning white. "Thank you, Harry," he choked out. "Thank you for saving my life." I shook my head. "You saved me, Luis. If I hadn't met you, I would still be shivering at that bus stop or rotting in shady pines. You reminded me who I was. We finished our breakfast in comfortable silence, the kind shared by people who have been through war together. I looked around the diner. It was nothing like the country clubs I used to frequent. The coffee was bitter, the seats were vinyl, and the noise level was high. But it felt real. I paid the bill, leaving a tip that made the waitress gasp. We walked out into the crisp morning air. Luis climbed into the cab of the big blue truck. He fired up the engine, and the diesel roar sounded like music. He blew the air horn once, a deep blast of triumph, then pulled out onto the highway heading north. Sarah stood beside me, watching him go. "Not bad for a retired old man," she said, nudging my arm. "Not bad for a nuisance lawyer," I replied, smiling. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the cold, clean air. I had lost a fortune. I had lost my status. I had lost the empire that took me 40 years to build. By all metrics of the world I used to live in, I was a failure. I was a man who had fallen from the dizzying heights of success to the humble ground of a startup. But as I watched Luis merge into traffic, as I thought about the other drivers we would hire, the lives we would put back on track, I realized I had never been richer. I had lost a customized mansion, but I had found a home. I had lost a son who viewed me as an ATM, but I had found a brother in a soup kitchen and a daughter in a courtroom. I put my hands in my pockets and turned to walk toward my own modest car. I had a lot of work to do. There were schedules to write and clients to call. But for the first time in 20 years, I wasn't dreading the day. I was looking forward to it. I had lost an empire, but I found my sleep again. And more importantly, I realized that family is not the blood that runs in your veins, but the people who are willing to reach out their hand when you are face down in the mud. This story taught me that true legacy is not about the buildings you own or the zeros in your bank account, but about the lives you touch and the integrity you keep when the lights go out. We often think we need to tolerate toxicity just because it comes from a relative, but loyalty should never come at the cost of your soul. Sometimes you have to lose the life you built to find the life you deserve. If this story resonated with you and you believe in second chances, please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. I want to know your thoughts. Have you ever had to cut ties with a toxic family member to save yourself? Tell me your story in the comments below. Stay strong, stay kind, and remember, it is never too late to start over. See you in the next video.